So I'm Vince Galvin, Chief Methodologist of Stats New Zealand and Chair of the Board. Our other members, Viliami, if you just quickly say hello to everybody, so that people...
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Viliami from Tonga. I'm the government statistician from Tonga. Hello Lili.
Appear.
Hello everyone. I usually take the shotgun and just put it in the chat. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, good idea. Who else are core members? Bruce, you're a member, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Bruce Fraser from the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
And I can't remember. Kristen, are you a member or what's your status? You're a...
I'm an observer.
Right.
No need for introduction. But for the curious, I'm Kristen Himalayan. I'm a senior economist and statistician for the World Bank based in Washington, D.C., and I'm the team leader for the Global Bank's Poverty and Equity Pacific practice.
Thank you. Okay. We'll begin the business of the day, I feel. So, first of all, just before we...
Sorry, Chris Ryan's representing the UN agencies.
Oh, of course. Sorry, Chris. I didn't want to demean your status. Chris.
That's okay, Vince. Yeah, as I said yesterday, Chris Ryan, I'm the statistician with SCAT Pacific Office, and I'm representing the UN. So we sort of have a rotational basis for the UN. I think Stanley from UNICEF's representing, Sandra from UNFPA. So we rotate it, but we've got one official spot on the board.
Thank you. Mike, is there any other general matters before I start? I was going to do just 3 minutes on the agenda and then launch into the first session.
I think we can launch in.
Okay. So all I was going to say about the agenda, obviously the individual time-consuming item is the poverty guideline discussion we're going to start this morning. Looking through the items on the agenda, some of the ones that are later on, which is follow-up from previous meetings, I will confess in advance with my not being part of Stats New Zealand and coming back into this meeting. Some of these issues I'm not really, haven't done too much preparation on, so we'll be able to move through those items quicker than the time is suggested on the agenda. So if we get to a point, so it may well be that as a contingency, we might take all the way through to the break on poverty if that's needed, not the poverty guidelines, but please don't panic if that happens, because we'll easily make up time on the rest of the agenda. So that's all I wanted to say about using the time. Does that sound reasonable? Yes, there's actually a thumbs up you can use if you agree with the suggestion I discovered when I was playing last night on the Zoom. Well done, Tristan. Oh, Bruce, there we go. Michael, and the clapping hands, right. Okay, so without too much further ado, we'll start the discussion on poverty guidelines. So this is, we're crystallizing things. We're moving through a process here. We've had quite a substantial discussion about that in our last meeting. And since that meeting, as you will have seen, we've taken some critical issues and made some proposals, invited a number of reviewers to make comments on them. And Kristen, most of you're going to be reviewing those comments and making further recommendations as a consequence of those of the reviewers and your team's reaction to the reviewers' comments. Is that what we're going to do now?
So I circulated the annotated agenda. Has everybody received that? Hopefully.
On me yesterday.
It's on the website.
Yes, the annotated agenda was delayed because we were late in receiving comments from Professor Dutt from Monash University. So the annotated agenda is usually how we do this in the, because this is the same format we use when we review any of our products for before dissemination at the World Bank. So basically, the idea would be that we have the annotated agenda. The team has highlighted areas of agreement and areas for further discussion. So I guess the quickest way to do it is to ask if anyone has objections to the areas of agreement, and then to invite discussion on the areas under discussion. And then usually, in our case, the chair will make the final call as to what to endorse, what to endorse tentative to or subject to, or what to not endorse. And then the team moves forward with that guidance.
Hey.
So that's usually how we do it. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to do it that way here, but I'm just kind of following our format because it kind of mirrors how you would think about an academic review if this were an academic publication.
Well,
Sorry, can I just check which document this annotated agenda is? What's it called on the website, Mike?
I think it's called Annotated Agenda.
Maybe I need to refresh the website or something. Anyway, carry on.
I'll circulate it in an email.
Okay.
Kristen?
Yes?
So PSMB poverty guidelines.
Oh, right. So maybe if you step us through the areas of agreement first.
Okay, we can do that.
And then we'll, because let's just see if we do have something that relates that agreement, and then we can start talking about the areas of this.
Yes. So the areas of agreement, talking about question 1 from the list of questions for further discussion. Basically, the reviewers endorsed the recommendation to use the median unit values from the lowest area of geographic disaggregation at which stable estimates can be calculated. There was some more comments from the reviewers of basically what defines a stable estimate and a couple of quality checks, and I think those are all very good suggestions, and we'll take those on board as we develop the final product. The second area of agreement was on dietary energy requirements. The reviewers actually recommended something slightly different than what we had proposed, but in reading through their suggestions, I think it makes sense. The consensus was that instead of using the poor population, they suggested using the overall population, which I would agree with the technical argument made as to why that makes more sense in terms of underestimation or eliminating the chance of potential underestimation. And, in looking at the data as we did this, the choice of the population didn't make a radical difference. So it's not gonna move the estimate much. In addition, it's a lighter data requirement. So at any time we can have a lighter data requirement, it makes the calculations more straightforward. So I think that's relatively straightforward. Adjustments to the poverty line. Both reviewers endorsed using the CPI to adjust the line up rather than calculating a new line in every round. There was some discussion about how to use the CPI, whether they should use the food line should be adjusted by the food CPI and the non-food line should be adjusted by the non-food CPI. I think that makes sense as long as those measures are available and are considered to be sufficiently updated and of good quality to do the updating. So there was agreement. Then there were a couple of points on the PSMB, mainly from Giovanni's comments. He went through the PSMB slides and gave quite detailed comments. They were really helpful. They're great, and we'll take most of them on board. There's nothing, as I read through, that jumped out as something that didn't make sense. I highlighted a couple of other areas in the area for discussion. And I think then the final point here is that a number of reviewers made the point that there needs to be some level of simplicity and straightforwardness and transparency in the calculations. And we definitely agree with that. The example of the dietary energy requirements, if we don't have to do it by finding out the height and weight of the poor, then let's not. At the same time, the World Bank's position is and always will be that there's no reason to sacrifice rigor, that, the more advanced methods using statistical analysis software, it's a process, but that national statistics offices, they can develop this capacity, they can develop this skill, and it is a long-term commitment, but that's what it needs to be. So we very much, that is how we feel and how we always will feel, and we hope that the IDA project will go a long way to supporting our client countries in developing these skills. So that's kind of the areas where we have general agreement from the reviewers. I guess we can take comments or discussion on that section before moving on.
I was going to say, I thought we should stop there and give everybody a chance to...
and Vince, just to let you know, it looks like Giovanni just joined from 1 a.m. in Rome. So maybe it looked like it. I thought he just came on. Giovanni, are you connected?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi, Giovanni.
I'm super late. I'm sorry. There were problems with all kinds of problems. I'm sorry I'm late. I hope I'm not interrupting you.
Not at all.
We enormously appreciate you getting up at 1 a.m. in the morning we're very grateful for you making that effort. That's very much appreciated.
It's really my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Kristen, for pointing that out. We're anxious because it struck me in doing this. I think what we might do, because it struck me that a couple of the points you raised there, Kristen, were sort of reasonably generic about simplicity and sort of transparency and complexity. So maybe in the first instance, I think that might be part of our broader discussion at the end when we've gone through some of these things. So because I suspect that'll be an issue that we wanted to talk about as we're doing it. But first of all, the first three specific points, which are the pricing of home production and gifts, the dietary energy requirement, and the adjustments of the poverty line over time. Do people want to have a discussion about any of those?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify whether the guidelines make recommendations for the conduct of market surveys during household income and expenditure surveys. It's really critical. Like I can see that Kristen has stated here that, it's subject to a minimum number of observations, including quality checks. In processing some of the data sets, we have, one unit price observation or unit value observation. And it's not enough. It's not good enough, but sometimes that's just what you're stuck with. So I think I don't question the recommendation herein, but I think in addition to the recommendation, we should add that the conduct of market surveys at a low geographic domain is essential as a complementary data set into poverty analysis and other analysis.
So Vince, maybe we can let the reviewers weigh in if they have thoughts, since we have now 2 of 3.
Yes, no, indeed. Please, reviewers or anybody else, but yes, that's a good idea. Give it to the reviewers first. So the reviewers, so we've got Giovanni and David. Who do we have online?
Thanks. If I can just come in on this, I mean, I agree with what Michael has just said, and again, getting back to this principle of trying to keep it as simple as possible. I've actually been advocating with Michael and his team for quite some time that it would be far more simple to enable the NSOs with their local knowledge to set, as it were, farm gate prices for home production in the rural areas, simply using an estimate of the transport costs and so on, getting what it would cost to get something from a rural area to the central market, and then adjusting that rural price accordingly. That would ensure that there was consistency across the countries and consistency in the way that home production prices are calculated in each region. And it would enable the focus to be on the estimates of quantity with a centralized setting of prices. Now, whether that's done through local market estimates or whatever, but where markets don't exist, that might not be possible. So it's a case of perhaps merging those two approaches.
Giovanni, do you want to say anything?
But I'm sorry, I didn't get exactly what is being discussed right now. I do apologize. I have just to figure out where we are standing with the discussion. I'm sorry about that.
Giovanni, in the Zoom chat, you'll see there's a link. There's a link to a document, and we're on page 1.2.1 of that document.
Yes.
We're talking about pricing of home production and gifts.
It's the annotated agenda that I had sent you previously.
All right, so I will look for that then. If you would excuse me for...
Yes, no.
I don't think that on this point I had particular sort of, I was in line, I think, with the recommendation in the agenda. Now, if you just allow me for a few seconds for opening the thing, if I have further thoughts, I will jump in. Otherwise, I don't remember having anything really worthwhile of your time adding on that.
Okay.
So maybe while Giovanni gets set, I can respond a little bit to the points that Michael and David made.
Yes.
So as far as the document goes, in terms of this document, it's not about the data collection, right? It's about once you have the data set in, how do you analyze it? So how the data is collected is a little bit of a separate issue. And it seems a little bit silly to separate them like that, but at some point you have to draw a line about what a document does. It can't be everything. So the objective of this document is talking about how to analyze the data, not necessarily how to collect it. Having said that, though, I generally agree that market surveys are a good complementary data source. There is a lot of discussion, or there has been a lot of back and forth, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, about market surveys, about whether the data coming from market surveys is better or worse than unit prices or unit values. I generally feel that more data is better than less data, and if it can be done within the budget and it can be done to a fairly high degree of quality, adding a market survey is a good way to go. As to David's suggestion about not collecting prices, but rather asking the NSO to guesstimate or the prices, I mean, I'm a statistician, so I always like data to come from sources, from surveys. In certain cases, you are stuck asking for expert opinions if you have a situation where you just have no way to price something. But I always believe the first best option should be to actually collect data from the field rather than to have somebody in an office do an estimate.
So, Kristen, just to make, I totally appreciate the need to differentiate between the poverty guidelines and the conduct of HICE, including market surveys. But I think you're sort of treading on dangerous territory if you set a minimum number of observations in the poverty guideline. The experience in Vanuatu is like by enumeration area, we have no observations. By province, we have no observations. We only have one national observation. And if you say, we need a median price where N is greater than 30, I think in most cases you're not going to derive a median price, and so in effect your guidelines will come to a dead end.
So specifically on the case of, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but the market surveys I think are important also to capture the seasonal fluctuation in prices and units or quantity by unit. When you look at seasonal fruits, a bundle of seasonal fruits peak in the season is much bigger than a bundle of seasonal fruits at the beginning or the end of the season. So this is where the market survey and having time series throughout the survey comes into play.
So the Vanuatu survey, I've had a little bit of back and forth with Darian about the method being used, and it's a little bit different than what we usually do because of this issue. So we can follow up bilaterally on that, on how the work is being done specifically in Vanuatu. With the point you just raised about bundles and quantities and variation, that's a non-standard unit survey, and I think everybody's in agreement that should be done. And so if in the process of collecting the data on non-standard units, it makes sense to collect prices too, I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I think that we can write the guidelines in such a way that it suggests using the best possible source for prices. I have a little bit of a hesitation of issuing a blanket recommendation on using market surveys because the quality is so poor in many places. You end up with large chunks of missing values, or markets are in places that are 50 to 100 kilometers away from where the actual enumeration area is, because in order to get all the items on the list, the enumerator had to go to a big market. And so instead of, kind of getting them at the closest market and not filling out everything, they went to the regional capital, and filled it out there. So there's a lot of methodological issues around collecting market prices that I think we could sort of deal with. Right. And that might be something that perhaps the methodological work or the innovations can look at. But generally, yes, I think the best source of data should be the best way to collect it.
The best available source or something like that. Then
yep. I think that covers everything.
For this immediate point. Okay. Are there any other comments people want to make in relation to those three particular points about this? That was the points of agreement.
If I may, just a quick comment.
Oh, sorry, Giovanni. Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm just. So I don't have any direct experience on Pacific Islands. I would like just share my concern about using market sort of surveys. My experience with different places like Seychelles or Maldives, very often when we have a chance to compare unit values with market values, for a significant percentage of items, we have big discrepancies where the unit values peak and where the market price is. And that, unfortunately, is for many relevant items like fish and other perishable goods. And the reason being is that these items, they are sold by the street, their price changed by the time of the day, given the lack of refrigeration or. So there is this big difference between market prices and the price that is actually paid by the people when they purchase the thing, because they don't purchase it in the market. And the pricing, technically the pricing is not linear, right? So because of the circumstances, the context. And so I'm not saying that this is for all items, but for many items that matter in the diet of the people in these islands, we observe this big gap between where the distribution of unit values as reported by respondents peak, meaning this is the average price that they pay for that specific type of fish or variety of fish, and what is recorded on the market. The reason being that they simply don't buy it in the market, and by 2 p.m. The link between quantity and value just is broken because it's getting late. Fishermen are eager to sell the thing, and so the price schemes change and the purchasing power changes. So we have this not easy to solve situation. I'm not saying that this is because, as I said, I'm not familiar with the Pacific context, but this is what we have, the big problem that is repeating, and we're coming up again and again in other places like Maldives and Seychelles I'm more familiar with.
Okay, thank you. So, but the resolution of that in my mind is the best available source. Now, I just want to be trying to just be a chair here. I'm conscious that we've that if this is the items we thought were the ones for agreement. We haven't even started one of the ones where we're going to have debate, and we've got an ambition to get all this to get as far as we can, essentially in the next hour. So I would appreciate everyone's sort of sense if we can help figure out what our way ahead is. So, however, I don't want to gloss over things that need to be discussed, because if we need to discuss them, we need to discuss them. So now I'll invite again if there are further discussion required on those three items that were classified as areas of agreement in the annotated agenda: home production, dietary requirements, and adjustments to the poverty line over time.
Vince, can I just come in here on the dietary energy requirements? I think it's important to note that the recommendation that we're now considering breaks the continuity of what we've been doing over the last decade or so with UNDP and ADB analyses. In the past, we've always used either 2,100 or 2,200 calories per day as the benchmark, as the anchor for the food poverty line. What we're suggesting now is that if we use the average food consumption, the dietary energy requirement of the whole population, this is going to put up the food poverty line quite significantly and will have a material impact on the overall level of poverty incidence that is ultimately calculated, because moving the poverty line up will also, if we adopt the recommended methods of calculating the non-food component, that will in fact push up the non-food component as well. So this recommendation could have a very material impact on the incidence of poverty relative to the calculations that have been done on the previous analyses, the 20 or so analyses that have already been conducted. So I think that's something that needs to be considered.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you. Giovanni, do you want to react, or Kristen, do you want to react to that?
I mean, I can just say simply that this is the time that we're revisiting the poverty guidelines, right? It's not just the 2,100 calories that's changing. It's what's included in the aggregate that's changing. It's the method of calculating the non-food poverty line. I mean, we are breaking continuity. And even if we don't change even if we did everything exactly the same as the guidelines from 15 years ago, we're switching to CAPI in most countries. And so you're breaking the series anyway. So I guess, looking back, a year or so to when we started this process, the impetus for this discussion is that we were going to break the series anyway when we switched to CAPI. So it made sense to, if we're going to break the series, update everything, update the data collection methods, update the methodology for calculating the consumption aggregates, and update the methodology for calculating the lines. So I definitely agree that in most cases, continuity is king, and we try to make sure that we can compare back. In this case, it looks like we'll be imputing back trends. And that's just how it'll have to be. And that comes to the point everywhere. I'm sure the ABS and Stats New Zealand also come to a point where they update methodologies and break trends. And it's something you don't want to do all the time, but it does have to happen at certain points.
I know that usually it's not acceptable to answer with a question, but I'm trying here to reconcile the pragmatism, because I tend to share Kristen views that sometimes we have to pay a price for improving the method, and but I also understand the argument that we are disrupting or discontinuing something. So my question would be, if we used the super standard method, and what I mean by that is that we take the population pyramid, we applied individual energy requirement as specifically calculated as possible to the context. My question is, what would be the estimated energy requirement using this very simple weighted average of individual energy requirements weighted by how many people of a certain age and gender we have, how far we would get from the current standard. Is that a big difference? Just empirically.
So we did a lot of calculations, Michael and I and Natalie Trudeau from FAO. We did a lot of different, and not everything was put into the note that we circulated. Our best guess is about between 23 and 2,400 is what that if you just take the population pyramid, use the FAO, WHO scales and do them. So it's not a
plus 20% by and large.
Yeah, I mean we were getting numbers high 22s, 23s. I think we got over 24 once or twice, but basically it's a little bit more.
So it boils down, to me, it looks like a political decision. Personally, I'm more in favor of using the method that, in my experience, we are using in most countries, population pyramids times individual energy requirement. And then if that implies a change, let a change be. And but I see that as a political decision. Technically, I'm in favor of this latter change. I for one.
Okay.
I would agree with Giovanni, yeah.
So that sounds something like, but however, thank you for raising the point, David. It sounds something that's a matter of transparency in the way we're presenting this. Anyway, well, okay.
I mean, I do believe that it will result in a fairly significant increase in the incidence of poverty across both at the food poverty level and more particularly at the basic needs poverty level, because it will have implications for the amount of non-food component. If we raise the food poverty line, and we're going to use the Ravallian upper bound approach, it will have a significant change in the non-food component, which could make a very material difference. Now, the original 2100, 2200 benchmark that we used for the calculation of the food poverty line was taken from work that was originally done by World Health and FAO. Now, if that methodology has been updated and that's no longer an acceptable benchmark, so be it. But it's what we took at the beginning as an anchor that we would have across the region to give a common estimate of the cost of the food poverty line. Obviously, if we change this now to looking at each population pyramid, we're going to get a different level of calories per day for each country, and there will be no comparability, if you like, across the region.
Can I come in?
Yes, go for it.
I think I agree that we need to change the minimum energy requirement according to the respective population dynamics. As we all know, that the 2,100 calorie comes from a reference population elsewhere, and it's not referencing to our own population. I think whichever methodology that will be calculating the minimum requirements, referencing to our own population will be more correct to us relative to using something that it's not. I mean, like, take for example our BMI. We often argue that the BMI for Pacific Islands are quite different from the BMI globally. I mean, like 2,100 is coming from a reference population in the old days. So I just want to make a point that I believe that it's going to be improved if we use the reference population, what FAO and other organizations is calculating. But with reference to maybe our Pacific Islands or with our own population, which will reflect true values of our energy requirement. One of the things that I wanted to add is whether there is any tendency to look at the variety of foods, and because as we know, the energy requirements of poor people in the Pacific can easily satisfied. It might be, I'm not quite sure whether the recommendation will be taking into consideration the different variety of foods, which might have impact of cost on costing, but it will be having a correlation between those and the poor that might give us a more idea on the distinguishing between the poor and the non-poor. Because I think at the moment, if you eat cassava, you can easily satisfy the calorie requirements, but you are in the lower quintile of the wealth index, if you might use that reference. But I might just put forward if there is any thinking in line of the different variety of foods. Thank you.
Can I just ask, so Kristen, do I understand correctly that you're proposing that we calculate the minimum dietary energy requirement using the FAO method? So my understanding is that the FAO method accounts for the heights and sex of the population, and then also fertility rates and infant mortality rates, but it does not account for activity of the population. So are you proposing to include or exclude activity in the calculations? Just the population distribution.
So in the discussions with Natalie, we were talking about using just the population pyramid, the distribution. That's based on work in the FAO that sets those calories for that population pyramid. And those components go into that. And there's a kind of a fundamental difference between the FAO, WHO. They use the minimum because they're trying to identify undernourishment. We would use the median because it's the amount of calories you need to be a full participant in life. We don't want to identify people that are at the bottom. But these are in the FAO tables. I think it's the ADR that we would use instead of the MDR. It's in the table somewhere. Natalie has it. She's shared it. And I think also Giovanni was interested in coming in.
Yes, Giovanni, sorry,
I will be very quick, I promise. Probably possibly a compromise solution in a way. The second parameter that should be considered, it's how to price the energy, the calories, right? So if increasing the energy requirement doesn't necessarily imply that we are increasing poverty. It depends on how we price the single calorie. And that brings us to the method that we use to attach a price to a single calorie. The choice of the reference group is going to matter. One of the issues that was debated was whether to include or not the first decile, if I remember correctly. So if we decided, for instance, to bring in the first decile, and I personally tend to be in favor of that, not always, not necessarily, but that could more than offset in principle the increase in energy requirements. So one might consider to bring in the change in the method, adopting the population pyramid. This is solid evidence. This is standard. My understanding, my experience is what we do in all countries in the world. Even better if we take the population pyramid from Census, right, rather than the survey. Individual energy requirement, they are as objective as we can possibly be in our profession as a social scientist. So the energy requirement should be okay with me. I see as more controversial, as more worth of our time to decide how to price each calorie. And in principle, we could hope to avoid the increase that I understand that is unwelcome. I'm sorry, I'm very little familiar with the context, but if the concern is that the automatic increase in poverty rates and hence all the consequences that come with that, that could be avoided if we change the way we price the cost of 1 calorie. So the choice of the reference group, whether decile 2 or 3 for the unit values instead of decile 1-3 or 2-3 or any combination, that might sort of be the way to go if we have a problem with the political digestibility of this change.
Giovanni, just to give you information on that, in the past, all the previous analyses have used the cost of a calorie based on the actual consumption patterns of the lowest 3 deciles. So we've taken the food consumption of the lowest 3 deciles, estimated the cost of a calorie, and then applied that to either the 21 or 2200 to give us the food poverty line.
Sorry, thank you for this. So you are already including the first decile.
Correct, yes.
Right, then my second question, in my experience at least, but I think we are all aware of this, we have more degrees of freedom, right? Because we have the way we calculate, given the reference group, the bottom 30%, we can calculate the mean or the median. The use of the median, it's clearly it clearly helps to keep poverty rates down. And the second thing, it's whether to use plutocratic or democratic way of calculating things. That also makes a difference. So I suspect that if it might be worth checking whether we really have to expect this increase in poverty. And my sense is that in all discussions, what is more controversial is the choice of the reference group and all this nitty-gritty that we have to go through in order to come up with the cost of 1 calorie more than the energy requirement. Now, I'm not saying that, of course, I'm not in a position to endorse one calculation of the other, but I'm just saying that in my experience is more debatable how to price 1 calorie, much more than the energy requirement calculation. That's my empirical experience.
I want to move the discussion onto a new to the topics that we actually had. We said we didn't think we were going to agree about. My sense that there's clearly concern about the discontinuity arising from this, and so I think and my own inclination is that when you do look to update measures, you are going to have discontinuities, and I think managing the impact of the discontinuity is something we're going to have to address. You know, and that'll be an issue that crosses a range of these issues, but I would like to accept that we will update the way we calculate the energy requirements. And I'm rather anxious to at least get us starting to assess the areas for discussion, if we could do that. And I was hoping, so Kristen, could you just run us through what they are?
Sure. We talk about first that multiplier for prepared meals. Here there was quite a bit of discussion from the reviewers, partly because the way I came up with this multiplier is something that I came up with rather than something from the literature. John Gibson and I spent quite a bit of time discussing this, and there just aren't references in the literature. So I proposed what I ended up doing, and he said it didn't sound completely crazy. So we did it, and it actually worked fairly well. We did get numbers that were reasonably sensible. The problem is we don't have a ton of observations. It wasn't from a survey that was, or an experiment that was designed for this. And so I think the question around the multiplier is that currently there isn't really a way that this is being done. Some surveys use 0.15, or sorry, 0.5, or 1, sorry. Some surveys use 1.5, some surveys use 1. So there isn't really there isn't an accepted method that's currently being used. My recommendation based on the analysis that we did and then the reviewers is that this is an area that we need to do more work on. I think that perhaps it's something that we could come up with a proposal for, not we, I mean, I'm I'm just an observer, but a proposal could be constructed for the next PSMB as something that could be studied in more detail. But as we do have 3 of these sets of analysis for Vanuatu, Kiribati, and RMI that need to go forward in the next few months to adopt an interim value with the caveat that we should do sensitivity analysis to make sure that we're not seeing major fluctuations, and do more research and try to figure out something better. But in the interim, we need some guidelines because currently there isn't a consistent approach. So I don't know if you want to discuss the multiplier or you want to continue, Vince, through all of the, I know you're conscious of time.
Well, look, I only want to, so can maybe what we'll do is that you've raised that issue. Can I just quickly see if anybody, whether people are very concerned about this and want to have a discussion about it, or whether we could, I mean, because that does sound like use an interim arrangement and clarify the approach later on, which sounds like the sort of approach we can agree to because there's other opportunities to revise it later. So I would like to. That seems like the sort of issue that we could agree to with that proposal. But again, please raise an alternative point of view if you're not comfortable with that.
Can I just seek clarity? So, Kristen, in Vanuatu, we've actually applied the 1.34, 1.1 and 1.51 for breakfast, lunch and dinner respectively. But are you recommending for the interim that we use a multiplier of 1.25?
That seemed to be the consensus from the reviewers' comments, is that the analysis that resulted in and gave us those multipliers was a little too cute. Wasn't based on a ton of observations, wasn't, it wasn't from a purposely designed experiment. We knew we had problems with some of the data that we were using. So that sort of to kind of not take an average, but pick kind of a median value, 1.25 with sensitivity analysis would be a better approach than to try to use these very precise, but probably precisely wrong estimates that came from that analysis. And the analysis was useful that it sort of gave us bounds, and the orders of magnitude on the meals. You would think like lunch is something probably with low margins. You're getting it from a cook pot on the side. Dinner is something else. So, it points in the right direction. So it gives us orders of magnitude, but it's not perfect, and it's not something that we want to carve in stone and set. The last guidelines lasted for 15 years. So this is not something we want to carve in stone for the next 15 years, but maybe, write in pen, and then with the idea that we might revise it as we have more information.
Okay, thank you. Clarification. Look, I'm going to want to move us on to the next one, well, because that felt like an interim thing that we can agree to the point. Health spending.
Okay, health spending is a perpetual area of discussion. I think based on the reviewers' comments and the work that went into the note, we advocate in the questionnaire design trying to split out health spending into the 3 categories to the extent possible. Preventative and elective care, urgent care, and catastrophic. And I think catastrophic is pretty well covered. We have things like hospitalization and, major surgeries that are already in the questionnaire now. So it's just kind of tweaking the questionnaire to try to differentiate between preventative and elective and urgent. I think the reviewers didn't necessarily think that we should be calculating elasticities, which I think is fine. This goes to that point about simplicity and making things straightforward. So kind of looking at the history of what has been included in the past, looking at the literature, looking at the elasticities that we did calculate, I think a recommendation for now of including both urgent and preventative / elective care for now should be the guidelines. And if it changes, right, because health spending, that elasticity can change as a country develops and change. Maybe the next time the poverty line is revisited, that would be something that we might want to revisit. But, at this point, I am also I'm open to disagreement and comment. I think what's important is that we sort of pick one method and we decide that that's what we're going to do.
Okay. Just to identify what if there's a major concern, people want to talk about it, they could identify it, and I'll sort of write it down and then manage the time coming back and talking about it. That would be the way I'm trying to identify how to actually manage the time that we're talking about here. So if there's a major concern, can people just identify what the major concern is that they want to discuss?
My major concern is actually operationalizing this, and how do we identify catastrophic health expenditure versus other.
Right. So
yes, and so that point was raised by a couple of reviewers, and I completely agree. And this is one of the reasons that actually led to, if you look at the next steps, that we adopt these as preliminary guidelines, because once we get through these 3 countries of having actually operationalized this in 3 cases, and we'll be able to look at how that experience went, plus get feedback from the NSOs about how they thought it went in the discussion, because ultimately, you know, we make recommendations, but they have the final say. If they say they want urgent care excluded and, you know, it's methodologically defensible, then we're going to exclude it. So I think, you know, as we roll this out over those 3 countries, it gives us a chance to sort of workshop the recommendations, make sure they truly are fit for purpose, and come to final sets of recommendations. I think Gaurav mentioned in his comments that we should set a threshold value, you know, 30% of total expenditure or something, and that's something I can look at with the Vanuatu data and then the upcoming data sets to sort of solidify it a little bit more.
I think it's also important to note that in the analyses that we've done in the past, health spending in almost all the countries is really quite low, because in most countries healthcare is free. So it's only in places such as Fiji and Papua New Guinea, where there are extensive private healthcare facilities, that that sort of expenditure would incur any major item even for catastrophic expenditure. If you're in most of the countries, that sort of treatment will be free, so the expenditure will be quite low, especially for the poor.
Okay, that sounds like we've got operational issues that will resolve down the track, but the general principle is well accepted. So I'm going to move us, I'm just trying to keep moving here. Can we move to talk about price deflators?
Yes. So price deflators, if there's a write-up in the annotated agenda, but basically this is sort of a gravity model. The world expert on price deflators is John Gibson. John Gibson is in New Zealand. He is a major source of guidance for the region. And this is, you know, I would argue that there's probably no better scholar on price deflators in the world than John. And John feels very strongly that you should use, if you're not going to use a country product dummy model, which I think, going to our argument about simplicity, I don't think we should. If you're not going to use that, you should use a Turnquist. And I don't feel that I have the background, or either in the region or in the subject matter, to argue with John on this. So in this case, I did some methodology work, I did some checking, examined the implications, but ultimately I think this is a case where I am happy to defer to somebody who's much smarter than I am on this subject.
Identification of main concern from someone.
I will not even try to engage with you know, in the academia, we just naturally engage. So let me try. We have a very important result that is suggesting that we should use PASHE. This is the recommendation that comes from economic theory if we wanted to have a welfare indicator that is a money metric utility function. This is the algebra. This is Deaton, which has a good reputation, at least as much as John Gibson. So here we have it's not me, but we have a different recommendation. The recommendation that we have in Deaton and Zaidi paper, it's let's use PASHE. So the argument in support, if I understood correctly, as Kristen said, I'm not a price expert. In this field, I'm a practitioner. So the argument is that Tornquist should be recommended because it's more robust to the presence of outliers. And I don't think this is a strong argument. If the price that I pay for gaining robustness against outliers, it's that I have to abandon the theoretical framework that suggests to use Pache, so that to have this link between our welfare indicator and economic theory, I might be tempted to resist temptation to use Tornquist and clean the data, get rid of outliers, and then use Pache, even if ex ante it's less resilient to the presence of outliers. So I'm not convinced at all about this recommendation. I don't have a sense that there is a theoretical argument strong enough for supporting this claim. Maybe there is this more than relevant, important empirical argument. Maybe the experience that John Gibson has on this, it's enough for more than offsetting the theoretical argument. So I'm not in a position to judge. I just wanted to share my concern that with all respect for this super expert colleague, I really can't accept the argument as such. That's not an argument. And so the Pache has a strong argument. It's the only, period. That's the only, not even Las Perez, not even a Fisher, right? Not even a Fisher is the spatial deflator that we should use. So I'm very happy to change my view and to bring and change my practice. I'm serious, I mean it, right? But I can't really accept the argument. So I would love to have maybe a better explanation for this preference, and then I'm happy to take it on board. But otherwise, I can't really figure out and buy this argument.
Sorry, Vince, can I just come in here and again refer to what we've done in the past, because this will be quite a change from what's been done on the previous analyses. In most of the, well, in fact, in all the previous analyses, we've calculated sub-regional poverty lines where those have been appropriate from the food basket of the actual regions, all anchored to the same 21 or 2200 calories per day. So I'm not myself convinced that we need to make this change for the deflators when we've actually got the sub-regional poverty lines. So I'm open to being convinced, I guess, but I wonder what the real benefits of going to all this extra calculations and the explanations of what the deflators are, which deflator we should use, which methodology, when we're already using a system of deflators through using the actual sub-regional poverty lines.
This sounds like an issue we're not going to resolve right now.
This is an additional problem, right? If I understand correctly, because the sub-national poverty lines define an implicit spatial deflator.
Yes.
And that's a different option. My opinion counts for nothing, but I'm very happy with the use of sub-national poverty line as implicit deflators, but many people have different opinions on this, and my vote would go for the use of sub-national poverty lines, but my vote here is not about voting, I guess, right? It's just striking a balance between the theoretical recommendation that goes for Pache, just summing up, the recommendation that we have in the agenda that goes for Tornquist, and then we have a third option that is the implicit spatial deflators defined by subnational poverty lines. So we have three options now, right? Not just two, but three. So I surrender.
So I think one of the reasons that we were thinking, so So I think generally there's a trend moving away from subnational poverty lines. And if you look at Gaurav Dutt's comments, he talks a little bit about why that is in terms of problems with estimation. I think a bigger problem is how to update them, right? So you have all these subnational poverty lines. Do you update them with national CPI? Most countries don't have subnational CPI. So even if it works fine at T0, what do you do when you go to the next round? Because you're not recalculating this again. You're going to update this line, and that's where it starts to get complicated. And so even if it's a very reasonable approach now, because of the issues with CPI and the way it moves, you're going to start over time getting separation. So kind of a safer bet is to have a national line. I don't think it applies in every case, but if we're looking to sort of pick one method for all, the trend is moving away from the subnational lines because of the difficulties in updating.
So look, I'm going to just intervene as the chair and say this sounds like an area where we're not going to resolve this immediately, and I want to at least put on the table the other issues that we have here. So I'll put that one in the parking lot for now. We've all still got the issues of exclusion of the poorest decile and the adult equivalence scales to talk about. Oh no, sorry, no, what am I talking about? The method for computing the non-food component, dear, a very substantial matter.
So here I think there's consensus that we should use Revalian. Whether we use Revalian upper or Revalian lower, Professor Dutt makes an argument for Revalian upper. If we think we're going to have a problem with the poverty line jumping because we add 20% to that calorie index, wait till you switch to Revalian upper. It's going to make that'll be a political issue. I don't know very many countries that use Revalian upper purely for that reason, despite its properties, its favorable theoretical properties. But I am in favor of calculating both and then choosing the one most appropriate based on context. And I think that's pretty much every poverty assessment I've done. That's what we've done. We calculate both, and then we pick based on discussions with the NSO, feedback, and the context.
Giovanni.
Agreed. I'm full agreement with this.
Vince, again, sorry, can I just come in on this one?
No, that's exactly what we're doing, David. Please continue.
One of the issues with using the Revalian lower bound and also using the Engels coefficient, which Kristen hasn't mentioned, is that because the rate of food poverty is so low, generally speaking, in all of the, well, in almost all the Pacific countries, you will only end up in looking at households that are in the bottom decile, i.e. the bottom 10%, or maybe in the second decile. So you're actually going to be looking at the extreme end of your distribution for estimating the non-food component. And in the past, it's been said that we should not be using the lower decile at all. But in fact, if we adopt the Revalian lower bound, we will be using the lower decile in almost all our calculations, which even I would agree is not a good basis. If we use the Revalian upper bound, my own estimates that I've just been trying to calculate do suggest that we would see a significant increase in the non-food component, and that would again push up the incidence of poverty. And that's obviously, as you mentioned, a political issue as to how much would that be acceptable. So I think we do need to do a bit more research on which is likely to be the most appropriate, and whether indeed the Revalian lower bound is actually a sensible option at all for the Pacific.
So this actually goes very well to moving forward with Vanuatu, Kiribati, and RMI and seeing if that problem comes up. So I think that in that case, this is something that we can revisit before we finalize the guidelines if it turns out to be a problem.
So this is an issue with the robustness of the estimation that we're talking about. Is that a fair summary, David?
Well, yes, I guess it is. I mean, again, to say what we've been doing in the past, we've always looked at the bottom 3 deciles. We've taken a simple average of the non-food consumption of all those households in the lowest 3 deciles. It's been a very simple approach, and it's worked, I think, reasonably well. What we're doing is moving to a different methodology that will have implications for the amount of non-food consumption.
David, move on.
So, Giovanni?
Ouch.
I'm just saying that
Sorry.
my understanding, the logic.
Let me just
Not muted.
Someone else is talking, maybe?
No, Giovanni, please talk.
I'm just saying that the logic of the cost of basic need method, it's exactly not to decide ex ante which decile we should use, but let the data sort of decide. So we have given a choice whether to use one reference group or another different reference group. The lower and the upper bound, it's just the only difference is the choice between 2 different reference groups. It could be decile, they're different deciles, of course. So it's a political decision, and this is explicit, this is transparent. The only advantage that I see with respect to the a priori choice of deciles is that we just let the data tell us how to identify the reference groups. And this is what the international community does. So I'm definitely happy with the recommendation to go with the original literature endorsed method, the CBN, cost of basic need method, where we are given a choice. And the choice, it's once again political, either upper or lower. Don't take the average. There have been papers explaining why. So one or the other, that's the way I think it's more flexible and the way I would recommend going.
Okay, so what we seem to have here is an approach that's theoretically desirable. Even then, we've got options within it, and concerns that in attempting to apply it, we may encounter a lack of robustness or in the estimation, and we seem to have the possibility of testing that with the 3 nations that we're about to attempt to apply the method to. So if the main concern is empirical, if it's possible in the scheme of things, it sounds like we should see how we do when we encounter these problems, bearing in mind that that if they are going to be substantial, then we're going to have to find solutions. So I do want to also, so we've got 2 more points. We've got the equivalent scales and the exclusion of the poorest decile, which we're also seem to have had some talk about now. Can we have some discussion about that?
Vince, sorry, it's Offer here.
Yep.
Just to note that there are some questions from EPIA. I don't think he can.
Oh, sorry.
So I think the Secretariat need to raise it.
Yes, of course. EPIA, sorry, if you've been trying to get attention, I apologise, because I've been trying to listen to the discussion and move the discussion. My capacity to function by and look at the chat at the same time, I'm simply can't do dual process. Is there something that you want to discuss?
It's already written it on the
I've written it in the chats because I think the discussion at the moment is still very technical to us small people in the Pacific Islands who are just data collectors at the moment. So we haven't done any particular analysis on the poverty side of things or considered any of the calculations on that. We usually rely on experts outside to provide us that. I think my question is there, of course, maybe we've already left the topic is on the CPI. You can read that, and if someone wants to respond to that, thank you very much if you can. And my second question is that is particularly on the the methodologies that are applied for determining poverty. Giovanni has raised good issues in regards to whether these are political decisions, where we draw the line, who draws that line. In small economies, I think most of the time the government draws that line in terms of how much they can pay the employees sort of thing, and how much the budget can afford to pay that. So it becomes a political decision in that sense. Certainly the stats office, the small stats office, do not have any power to determine those issues. So yes, it goes back to the ability of government to provide income to the households where markets are not available, especially in small island atolls. And also, there are very high reliance on imports. So we don't have any real sense of power in determining the prices at the retail end, because it's all cost recovery. Anyway, that's just my bit, but if you can answer, some of you, if you can answer my questions or queries in the chat, I'll be grateful to receive those. Thank you. That's it for the time being.
Thank you, Apia. So you've got questions in there about so yes, we rushed past that. So we've got a question about market, and we've got Apia to everyone.
Can I make a recommendation? Can we move quickly through the last 2 points, and then we can take up we can start the questions next. So I think with the adult equivalents, the recommendation from the reviewers was to update to the new OECD guidelines. I think that makes sense. I think they're an improvement for a reason. So I think that's no problem. The exclusion of the poorest decile, I think we've discussed this. I think the point is made, it shouldn't be an automatic exclusion, but we need to acknowledge that something weird is going on with a lot of these households, then it may be data errors, it may be, incomplete diaries, it may be they have just some very, very strange, non-representative situation. So I think these guidelines can be written in such a way that it's not a hard and fast rule, but it is sort of a caution, and talks a little bit about how to deal with that. And again, we'll start to see these as we move through with the 3 countries that we have coming up. I would say unless there are major objections, because those last 2 points are fairly minor, I don't know, Vince, do you want to go to the discussion, decision, and next steps? Or
so before we do that, we've appeared to attempt to engage in the conversation. So I'm just concerned that he gets. Can we at least look at the before we move on, because we rushed past him attempting to participate in the discussion earlier. This looks like that this was a question around pricing the fish carcass or kilos. Okay, we had some discussion about that, and I think that was raised as a problem by you, Giovanni, anyway, the difficulties of trying to deal with, well, you actually did discuss the price of fish, didn't you, during the day, and the variations of time of the day and the pressures on people. And I think you were, in that discussion, you were discussing it as a problem, a measurement problem, a data collection problem. And there's no easy answer to that, was the sense that I had from what you said. Apia, you've also asked about small low-lying atolls that are not producer and reliant imports, as the price deflators during the COVID crisis trade shipment disruption. So you're talking about periods, so you've had an external shock that's greatly changed the presumably prices and volumes have been very disrupted by a very significant external shock. Presumably that's an issue that we'll have to address in any, that's problematic, I presume, for all these measurement guidelines.
Vince, and maybe Kristen wants to come in on this one. I think that point about the impact of COVID on prices and supply is something that we hope to capture in these high-frequency phone monitoring surveys. Kristen, would you go along with that to try and? I mean, we're not going to actually get a definitive answer, but we're going to be able to get a feeling of what the implications are of those shocks on household living conditions.
So that's the idea. And prices are one thing that these surveys work quite well at capturing. So I think, yes, it's a little bit of a separate issue to what we're discussing here with how we use CPI in this context. But I think the point is very well taken, particularly in the current crisis. And I think, exploring the high frequency tools as to whether that's one possible method of getting at and dealing with this is kind of at least a first step in that analysis.
Just, Vince, one final point. We've been talking with ABS, and I hope in the next couple of weeks we will be holding a workshop to discuss how countries can actually deal with those price and quantity shocks on their regular CPI calculations. Again, slightly offbeat from here, but just to keep everyone informed.
Thank you, David. So look, yes, we need to talk about what we do next. I've been going through this discussion. I have a sense that there's some discussion where we've had enough discussion to progress the way we're going to draft the guidelines. Some issues that I felt were parked, and I think maybe I won't try and revise all that now. What is the that was so what actually is driving us in terms of where we have to be by when?
Vanuatu is ready to finalize. They'll be finalizing in the next 2-3 months, and Kiribati and RMI will be completed before we meet again, assuming we meet in 6 months. So I think the options we have are either to sort of move forward with interim guidelines or to kind of leave it as a bit of a free-for-all. I have strong feelings on which one of those might be a better way to go, but because we have to start this analysis for these for complete and then start for the other two.
It is a proposal, is it not, that we consider meeting in August?
We definitely can meet in August. The Vanuatu should be done hopefully before then.
Mike, I mean, it wasn't driven by this desire to meet this item. That is, you're going to propose that later on today, aren't you?
Yep, I'm going to propose in late August we have another board meeting. I think just to add to the conversation as well, and what Ipia brought up in terms of them being data collectors and leaving the big analysis to the development partners. Now, I think like that way of thinking sort of needs to change, and we need to bring everyone along with the program. I mean, it's not like we do it and tell them what their poverty rates are. It's important, from my perspective at least, that the government statisticians of the region can defend the poverty rates that they present to their government. So I don't think we can just go like, you collect and we analyse. Like, that's sort of, in my view, an unacceptable way forward, and it should be that everyone should understand the processes that have gone into computing poverty rates. I think that's something that's quite important.
Vince, can I just make a quick comment, please?
Of course.
I think in line with what Michael has said and what Ipia has said, is there an option to run the old and the new methods in Vanuatu as a testing ground? Because I think we need to give the comfort to the government statisticians that they can defend the new methods if they understand clearly how it changes and impact their poverty line running the old and the new. It's just a thought that comes to mind, and we have a few methodologies within the states New Zealand who are making the suggestion right now. Thank you.
So in response to that very quickly, we have proposed to do that in Samoa. Because Samoa was the last one done under the old method, and so we have been talking to Fono about doing exactly that, calculating old and new and doing the comparison. I think realistically with Vanuatu, there probably isn't time because of how far advanced it is. And Vanuatu was also, I think, a bit of an outlier in that it wasn't using the old method exactly as some of the other countries had been. So I think my suggestion would be that we take this forward with Samoa. We just signed our data access agreement. So hopefully we'll be able to move forward with that analysis. I don't think we'll have it ready for the end of August, but it would be a way to offer a comparison between the old and the new.
Can I just jump in? At the moment, I would say all the government statisticians are comfortable with the old methodology. It's quite straightforward, and they've been using it for quite a fair bit of time now. They have a fair bit of understanding of what's involved. And as Michael Sharp had mentioned, they're able to defend the methodology because they're able to explain it well when they're asked by the users. Something very controversial is the poverty incidence rate. It is very important that they are able to defend those numbers. The incident rates are difficult. It's not going to please anyone. The opposition would want it higher. The government would want it lower. So at the end of the day, it's the people who are explaining the methodology who need to be really familiar with the details of how the figures are derived. So as a way forward, all the suggestions about making comparisons and ensuring that they are well aware of where the changes have happened, and they're able to explain these when they're asked to. Thank you.
So I would absolutely concur with that. I mean, I think, you know, being a veteran of a number of these poverty assessment, poverty workshops, we usually spend 2 full weeks with the NSOs going through every single line of code, every assumption we make, everything. So, you know, we make, at least the ones that I have worked on, we always make sure that the NSO is comfortable with the product. And I have to say that I've never done one where we didn't make a change. You know, we come with 4,000 lines of code, and somewhere in there's like, no, that assumption doesn't make sense. We stop, we talk about it, we make the change. We keep going, we stop, we talk about it, we make the change. I have an anecdotal story about butter in Liberia that when we had to change a whole bunch of things because we made a wrong assumption about how butter was priced. And so I think, you know, we always focus on making sure that there's a lot of buy-in and understanding. I think we have a ways to go in the region before we have, you know, the capacity in Stata or R to sort of turn over the do files and being like, here you go, you're on your own. So I think, you know, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, it will be that intensive process. Every time there's a new survey, it'll be a lot of close collaboration and work to finalize the lines. And ultimately, the goal is that, you know, you guys send us the data, right? You know, the data is collected, it's crunched, it's analyzed. I get a data set with a poverty line and a consumption aggregate that goes into the global monitoring database, and then I'm done. You know, so that's my dream, is to be fired by you.
Look, I'm conscious that we've tried to discuss some very complicated things by a rather large committee over a relatively short period of time. And I'm sensing that there's some anxiety about leaping into all of this. I can't, but there always is going to be when we're trying to make a change. So but I sort of feel that maybe we need to, so I was hoping in some of the discussion we've had enough to do quite a bit of guideline writing. I think that at least the interim work that we've done, on the way through, we identified a lot of things to do. I do feel that we might have to have another meeting relatively soon for people who are interested to talk about some of the things that were left hanging a bit. And maybe we need to have a little more detailed discussion about what is the process of getting people comfortable, what is some of these bigger issues. But I have a sense that we are that we could spend a lot of time more now. We wouldn't be able to resolve much more right now. What I want to do is we'll work through what I thought, but maybe we'll just do this as we finalise. I don't want to do it right now because, to be honest, I think we all need to have a break. Work through where we said, okay, well, this is a matter of approval in principle. We're going to keep going and identify what happens when we try and apply it. There's quite a bit of that. There seems quite a bit of agreement, and there's a few places we'd park that. So I think we can progress those. I do think we probably, I'm expecting that we will meet at the end of August, and we may even have to meet in between now and that meeting in August to try and resolve some of the things that people clearly still want to talk about. That won't be, I'll make that an open invitation. But that's my sense of as much as we can do right now. But we are going to have to work through now. Help me if you've got some other suggestion. But that's what I felt. That's what I feel is what we need to do.
Perhaps a plea from those of us that are working on these poverty assessment and crunching the data currently, if we could sort of go through and kind of identify the areas that we think we still need more discussion, that sort of frees up the rest of us to continue with the other matters as settled. And if we are going to meet again, and we do, like I said, we do have ongoing analysis in Vanuatu and Kiribati, if there are these questions, they might be possible that we can look at them in those cases. It is important, though, at some point after the last 18 months of discussing this, that we start to close some of the issues.
Yes. So what I'm hoping that we can. I thought that we had quite a lot we were going to proceed with. So I thought. Tell you what. Can we have a break now, because we've been going longer than we were going to anyway. So can we have our 10-minute break now, and I will use that 10 minutes.
Is that us, or has everyone lost Vince?
I lost him as well.
It's Vince.
Looks like we've lost Vince. He's on a 10-minute break.
He's already gone.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll reconvene at 50 past the hour.
Vince given up his chair. Sorry.
And Giovanni, thank you for joining. I think everybody on this meeting completely understands that it's now almost 3 a.m. and that perhaps you don't
Thank you for
staying with us. We really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure meeting all these colleagues. I don't think I've never met with anybody in person. It was really a pleasure participating, and thank you for this opportunity of sharing ideas. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
How's our PhD room?
Good. We're discussing the complexities of poverty. It's a shame that there's not like a global authority. I mean, it's interesting because, when you look at like other...
There's not? Wait a minute. We have 15,000 economists that would have a discussion with you about there not being a global authority on poverty measure.
But why isn't there a standard measure, Kristen? I mean, when you look at like prevalence of undernourishment, food insecurity experiences, which are equally as complex in my view and use the same data set, I mean, they just seem far less controversial.
They're much simpler measures. If you think about the number of moving parts in those calculations, there's like 3, maybe 5. Somebody counted once, there's something like 150 individual decisions that have to be made in poverty analysis. Yeah. And there's a ton of literature around it. right? So I think, you know, Giovanni, who is just here, he is leading our team that's looking into consumption aggregates. After 20 years from the original Deaton anxiety, we're going to publish a book next year that revisits those Deaton anxiety recommendations, and Giovanni's the lead author there. And so we're going to review for that next week. And so having read that 171-page document now, I think 6 or 7 times, there are a lot of complexities to the construction of the consumption aggregate. And then, you know, Martin Ravellian is clearly the world scholar on poverty lines, but even he has upper and lower bound methods. And you know, so somebody who is even within his own work acknowledges the need for different solutions in different contexts. And you also, it's a difference between undernourishment is almost sort of like a hard and fast thing. Either you consume enough calories or you don't. Poverty is such a subjective measure to start with, even by its very nature, that any attempt to quantify it is always going to be fraught.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. It would just be easier if we all said, like, this is the way. Unfortunately, the next presentation is an example of this is the way.
Oh, actually, Mike, sorry, what I thought I was going to do is run through very quickly what I thought where we got to the last time.
Yeah.
So this is what I thought happened. So then maybe if we have time at the end, we may have to come back about this. So I'm just running through the areas of agreement, how to price home production and gifts, phrased around best available information was what I recall was the conclusion of dietary energy requirements. I thought in the end we were happy to proceed. Well, not happy, there was discussion, but we're adopting the new guidelines, bearing in mind the impact on continuity. We didn't discuss adjustments to poverty lines over time, so I, for the sake of that, will proceed with that as a recommendation. Moving to the areas for discussion, I had multiplier for prepared meals. We had some discussion about all that, but again, I suggest we proceed as suggested. It's interim until you know, the use of the interim value. Health spending, again, it was that was an implementation concern. So I took it we were going to progress as suggested. Price deflators, I had that as unresolved. That everybody started suggesting a whole lot of issues about that. So that what we do about that in the short term, maybe we'll discuss afterwards. The method for computing the non-component food component of the poverty line, there we discussed that there was a theoretical preferred approach, but we're very concerned about the robustness in its application, which is an empirical concern that we're going to address in the context of completing things. And we were happy enough to proceed as interim guidance on the equivalent scales and the exclusion of the poorest decile. Now, what we do need to talk about is that clearly in the course of all that, we need to, there are a range of generic issues that need to come up, which was about people's comfort and understanding of the of what was the impact of what's going to come ahead. Obviously, government statisticians need to be able to get some sense and warning of what's going to what they're in for if these interim guidelines become more widely used. Clearly, and now we don't need to discuss this in detail. I mean, Kristen, I've taken from what you suggested that this is a familiar process of introducing disruptive measures, but it may well be that in the course of some meeting we can all get a little more sense of what is the process that is used to give people comfort and support in terms of the if we are going to have disruption in terms of obviously the order of magnitude of the poverty line. So that was my summary of where that discussion got to.
I think that makes sense.
Just give us a way ahead at the moment.
Sorry, Vince.
Sorry, Michael, yep.
Yeah, I just want to revert very briefly to the adult equivalents. What we've agreed to do is to make a very minor change to the adult equivalent scales that we've been using in the previous analyses. And I wonder really whether we need to make that minor change. All it does is to make, instead of calculating every adult as one person, the new OECD measure has the first adult as 1 and every subsequent adult as 0.7 and all the children as 0.5. So it's actually going to have a very, very minor impact on the overall calculations. And I just wonder whether we really need to make that change. I mean, I don't know, Kristen, what do you think?
I mean, theoretically, there's a reason why the OECD updated its guidelines to take account to economies of scale. I mean, when this was suggested by the reviewers, I took a look at the documentation, and I'm convinced. I mean, you know, the OECD is a reputable organization. They thought this through before. I mean, they felt it necessary to update the guideline, even though it was a minor change. And reading through their justification for that update, I was convinced. And since it is a minor change, and we are changing so many things, it would make sense, you know, to might as well update everything. You know, as long as we're updating the couch, let's get new curtains too.
Okay. So, but we're looking to endorse these as interim guidelines, subject to understanding how they're being applied, and what the impact of the applications and what we have to revise and modify as we attempt to apply them. Okay.
Exactly. And I think this will be really important also for that training aspect, because we need to roll out training, right? You know, and it needs to be sufficient and specific enough that it makes sense. So in doing these first few, hopefully we'll actually be able to do live training, because it would be very difficult to try to roll this out over Zoom. But we'll figure it out, and that's the fun of this job. But we want to make sure that it's not just, you know, we get the guidelines set, but we also get the training materials, the dissemination, and hopefully we'll have somebody from SPC joining, a poverty economist, fairly soon, that can really take the lead in this area.
Okay. Now, Michael, I interrupted you before when you were about to help us launch into the next agenda item, which was the ILO, the labour market module. Oh no. Oh.
Yep. Go ahead, Vince.
Yes, no. So I was just going to this is you doing this, is it? The labour market module?
Yeah. So thanks everyone. So just to recall from the last meeting, we actually presented the proposed new labour market module that was developed by ILO and SPC for inclusion in population and housing census. You might recall that we've always had a core labour market module that's been included in census, but it never really met international labour market statistics requirements. And so while we were going through the household income and expenditure survey experiment, where you'll recall we updated the labour market module, we initiated discussions with ILO about revising the labour market module for inclusion in census. So the last PSMB, we presented what we proposed, and the methods board came back to say, like, okay, we acknowledge the limitations of the current module, acknowledge the positive response from ILO to develop this module. However, the board requested that the new module be tested in the context of the Pacific census. And so this session is to talk about the pilot test that we conducted in Kiribati in May this year, where we collected data in the field under the usual census situation, and we've provided the data to ILO who've done an analysis and came back with recommendation. So just as a quick background, so we collected data from the 15th to the 31st of May in Kiribati. We collected it across, I think it was the islands of South Tarawa and Abimama. So we had an urban-rural split. And we used those data. We had a relatively small sample. There was something like 150 households sampled. But it was sufficient for us to determine whether the labour market module performed well. And the analysis confirmed that it did in fact perform well. The analysis identified a few minor issues, coding issues, a few tweaks to wording of the module that need to be made. But in essence, it performed really well. It meets the 19th International Conference of Labour Statisticians standards. It meets the new International Standard for Classification of Employment, 2018. The feedback informally from ILO was that it's sort of the best labour market census data that's derived from census that they've seen. So they were really positive about it because I think they more commonly rely on survey data for their labour market data as opposed to census, but they did indicate that this was a really positive step for good comprehensive labour market statistics coming from the Pacific region. And then the other thing that they confirmed was that there's a large degree of consistency between the new HICE survey module that was endorsed by the Methods Board in 2019 and the new Census module that we're proposing for endorsement herein. And so that's really great. That means we'll have continuity and time series among census and surveys. So the overall sort of summary of our analysis of the Kiribati census pilot data was that the module performed really well. It will meet most of the international labour market statistics requirement. You know, we note that the census isn't designed to, I guess, provide a really comprehensive suite of labour market statistics, but what the new module provides coming from a census is very comprehensive. So, you know, based on the testing, we do recommend and invite the Methods Board to take note of the results. The paper and the results presented in the annex of the paper is on the website. The only thing in the paper, it refers to Annex 3, but it should be Annex 2, so sorry about that. So if anyone wants to have a deep dive into it, and in that paper is also like an annotation around you know, the slight tweaks that we should make to the labour market module to ensure it performs really well. It's available for review. But yeah, in essence, we invite the Methods Board to recommend that the new census module is adopted for all censuses conducted in the Pacific Island countries and territories. Furthermore, we ask for advocacy from the Methods Board and to promote the use of this validated census module for censuses in the Pacific. So it was a really short presentation from me. The one thing I would like to say is that I think these sorts of activities really highlight the importance of the Methods Board in the region. You know, we came to you in October with a proposed module and you said, like, looks good, but show us that it functions and performs well in the context of a census. And you know, we've gone and done that. And, so that highlights the importance of the methods board, and I think it also showcases the benefit of partnering with, authorities in these sorts of areas like labour statistics. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now, I don't want to predispose discussion, but that all seems very positive. So please, questions for Mike? And then is there anybody's got any concerns about us doing anything other than than what Mike's asking us to do?
I would like to enthusiastically endorse Mike's proposal. I think this, again, as he said, is a really good demonstration of how the methods board should work. So I think that's great, and I enthusiastically endorse with my non-member observer vote.
Yeah, right. Other comments?
Kristen.
I'd like to do likewise. I think this is a much easier topic than the one previous, so I'd like to do likewise.
Hey, Pia, I'm going to come spend a month in Nauru and make you the regional poverty expert. We'll just do it 8 hours a day, every day, and you will be the global resource.
That will be my pleasure to attend.
Okay. Look, so no, there's no mood to do anything other than ringing endorsement and thank everybody for the work they've done in getting to here.
I think Ellie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, the questions would cover some of the emerging demands for labour force statistics. What we have been noting is information on green jobs, tourism-related information, formal and informal, and the questions in the tests that have been done do show that there are really positive signs that you could gather very reliable information from the census. And then being able to link it to the HICE has its advantages as well, because some countries are doing the small area estimation where you combine HICE information and the census. The more common variables that you gather, the better your link can be.
Okay. Okay. That all sounds really positive. I think we're going to just deal with that. So that's an agenda item done with, and bathe in how well that's all worked. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Good on you. Okay, the next agenda item is update on matters as per 2019 PSMV meeting report. And there's 3 discussion items listed under that matter. So I'll just check the participants. So I don't know if Viliami's been able to come back to the meeting, but I'd have to say that with my unavailability, Viliami and I haven't spent substantial time talking on the first matter, so I'll just have to record my apologies to people about that. Understand that that's a serious matter, but we've not had time on that. But we do have updates on the other 2 matters from Tracy and Ofer. So the sampling guidelines.
Good afternoon from here in New Zealand. It's Tracy Savage. I work on the Pacific program with Ofer. So yeah, just here to give a quick update since the previous meeting on the sampling guidelines for the Pacific, with apologies to my colleagues who are members of the sampling subcommittee that I haven't been in touch in the interim. So you're finding this out at the same time as everybody else. But yeah, so where did we get to last time? We'd asked for feedback from NSOs and interested parties. And one avenue we used to gather that feedback was the 2020 Regional Sampling and Planning Workshop, which is the next item in this session. So ahead of that, a couple of additions were made to the sampling guidelines, with thanks to Bertrand Bouffier at SPC-STD. He added a couple of sampling template case studies, and I worked with him to produce a glossary that supports that. And the aim of that was to improve the alignment with the workshop material and also make the guidelines even more practically relevant to the sort of workshop exercises, etc. So we then presented those to the participants during the workshop, asking the participants to review and provide feedback on those. And yeah, we did get some feedback, and that was very valuable. At the same time, the guidelines were also published on the Innovation and STD webpage. So that's another avenue for potentially gathering feedback. Mike, I don't know if you want to say any more on that.
No, and I don't think we have a comments section on that part of the website, but I think to date we haven't received any. I'll check as you keep talking, Tracy, but I've got nothing to add, thanks.
All good. So subsequent to that, in March 2020, just before everything started to get locked down in earnest, the Sampling Subcommittee had a meeting to discuss and consider the feedback and agree on which of the suggestions were a priority for finalising this first stage of the guidelines. So we had 3 initial chapters. So what was agreed was critical was ensuring consistency in notation and terminology throughout, because there'd been 3-4 different authors contributing, and the other one was adding another case study related to the workshop practical exercises on probability proportional to sample size. So I've since made those updates, and it's been circulated for final sort of fresh eye SPC, STD and Stats NZ review. That was done in mid-May. And that's effectively been on hold due to other priorities, primarily COVID-19 rapid response discussions, etc. So my appreciation to those reviewers. So I'll circulate that updated version to the Sampling Subcommittee afterwards so that you can see where it's currently at. Effectively, the next steps are to complete that review, get the finalised version, and SPC STD is very kindly offered to put it through the sort of publication process, which will do a lot of the sort of editorial formatting type stuff, which is great. Thank you. Some of the feedback related to sort of additional chapters around mix and disability, which we have draft versions of, but the guidance from the Sampling Subcommittee was that we need to, you know, let's get this first few chapters done, and then there'll be a second round of sort of consideration of where to next. So that was all. Any comments, Bruce, Mike, Kristen or Chris, who are also on the Sampling Subcommittee, please feel free to jump in.
Only more ringing endorsement. I think Tracy and Bertrand have really done a great job in taking the guidelines forward and bringing them toward where they can be kind of easily operationalized. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely thanks to Tracy. You've really carried this forward well, so thank you very much.
Okay.
If I could just jump in. Sorry, I did put my hand up, Vince. I was just wondering, I mean, I still never saw any feedback or inputs from the countries or NSOs. I'm just wondering if we could still push for that a little bit, just to get their views on how easy it is for the countries to follow. But maybe you did get some further feedback from 1 or 2 of the countries, Tracy?
No, we didn't in the end. And so the primary, we tried a number of different channels and mechanisms. And so I think there were 8 different NSOs represented at the workshop. So that was our best hit. You know, we had quite a few GSs and DGSs on the sampling workshop. And yeah, I'm not sure myself that further emails will push for more. So I think the thinking of the Sampling Subcommittee and SPC STD was that let's get them up there and promote them, etc. And and sort of see where we get to. So as part of that, hopefully different SPC and we can promote them when we're working with different picked NSOs, etc., and get feedback that way. But yeah, I think we're keen to progress in the short term and maybe do that in parallel. Is that?
Yeah,
Bruce and co.
Yeah, look, I agree. We've tried very hard, Chris. I absolutely agree it's valuable, but probably the best thing we can do to stimulate feedback is get them out and start people using them. And if anything's going to stimulate feedback, that'll be it. We're not trying to produce something that's going to last for 15 years. We want it to be a living document and continually updated.
If it helps, Chris, the feedback from participants was generally positive, but it's difficult. It's a 50, 70 page document now to sort of review it in the workshop and get feedback. But we tried really hard. The key bit of feedback that I think maybe PSND wants to know, would like to know about, is that all of the participants said it's useful in conjunction with the workshop, but would be perhaps difficult for some to get into and use if they didn't either have support from a colleague who'd done the workshop or knew a lot about sampling, or if they weren't able to do also the sampling type workshop at some point. So they saw the two as working really well together. But yeah, so that might provide some insight.
Okay. So so that looks fantastic. You got all that support. Clearly, we're very anxious to try and find places to give this to people to see how trying to use it makes them feel about the usefulness of the document or what else would be in there. So I only record the thanks that we're to everybody for persisting with us. It was sort of going to be our test case of trying to put something together and hoping that it would, we could get some idea of what useful supporting documents look like. So it's fantastic that we've got to the point where it's there to be used. Thanks, that's great. Moving on, Ofa, you're going to brief us on the 2020 sampling workshop?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, Vince. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Well, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. The sampling workshop, the annual workshop, is one of the events that we're very proud of at Stats New Zealand. This is the second year we have run it, and it cost our program about 120,000 New Zealand dollar. So that's quite a big amount of money, and we see the benefit of this workshop. Firstly, in bringing the different partners, development partners, to work together and provide support to the country all in one place. And I think this is something that we have struggled with in the past, where SPC will be going to individual countries to plan their survey, especially hires. But this time we are able to bring them to the room and we can share their experience, but also help them all in one event. So this year, this was one of our last visits to the Pacific before the lockdown. It took place on the 24th of February until 3rd of March. And the workshop focused on sampling, design and planning, but also focused on hires and mix and LFS. So we were able to, with the support of SPC, UNICEF, and other partners, we were able to deliver those the planning for those free survey in this one workshop. So that was something that that really makes it very efficient. In terms of participation, there were about 18 participants from 8 member countries, and that's quite a large number. And we also had 10 facilitators. I can't remember the names. I think Michael and Tracy will remember all of them, but it was well facilitated by partnership among the different partners. The feedback from the countries, it is a very valuable event where NSO can share their experience, but also partners can also work together in addressing some of the challenges and issues raised by the country. I think I'll stop there, and I'll just ask UNICEF and also SPC to provide your feedback, and I'll be good to hear from the countries their feedback on this workshop. And we are planning to continue with this workshop as an annual event. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Offa. So, feedback?
James, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Vince, Michael, and Offa for the good report. Indeed, I was one of the participants to the workshop, and indeed it brought together the all NSOs together. And one of the things that we liked, we shared the experience from various types of survey, like LFS, HICE, as well as mix. So it was a good opportunity of bringing and sharing the experience together, but also learning from each other. Thank you.
Yeah, so from SPC, I was unfortunately only able to attend the last 2 days of the workshop, but I was there during the feedback for the feedback on the sampling guidelines. I was also able to help with presenting the new endorsed HICE methodology for the Pacific region. But generally, I had really positive feedback from all of the participants. I think they particularly liked the opportunity, as James mentioned, to look at the sampling aspects of different surveys. So this was the first time that we included other surveys beyond HICE. So we were looking at mix, and I think also Bertrand had some sessions on sampling for labour force surveys as well as HICE. So they had exposure to like the different reference populations, I guess. But yeah, very positive feedback. I concur with everything Tracy said in relation to the sampling guidelines. I think it's a good initiative, and it's a wonderful partnership that we have with Stats New Zealand, which we're really appreciative of. Thank you. And I think the kind of theoretical cross-practical nature is really welcomed. The participants particularly appreciate walking away with a concrete deliverable, so that being their sampling plan. So yeah, I definitely agree that it's something that's of benefit going forward. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, James. Is there anybody else who wants to ask questions or make a comment?
Yeah, if I could jump in again, thanks, Vince. I mean, I was involved in these sort of trainings some time back with SPC, and I just found them such a really useful sort of training program, which I think a large number of staff within the NSOs could benefit from. So I'm just wondering whether this would be a good sort of training course to look at developing through e-learning so we can reach more people. I wasn't involved in the workshop which you guys are talking about now, but I mean, how easy would it be to possibly develop a version of that training via e-learning?
We have a link. We have one. So we have a sampling methods e-learning course. I think we have it in 4 or 5 languages now. But we do have that available, and I can send the link if you're interested. Obviously, you can develop your own, but since a lot of the material came from, or at least a lot of the material in the original draft came from this workshop, you might even recognize a few of the examples, but we'd be happy to share that link, and it's obviously free for anyone that wishes to participate.
And Kristen, it's Tracy here. I think we shared that link with the participants. And it is something we have discussed. Chris, Offa and I have discussed at least, and I think I discussed with Bertrand as well, about longer term the potential to turn it into some e-learning. And certainly we'd look to use the World Bank's excellent e-learning on sampling, and yeah, look at what's already available, but might want to look at needing to get someone who's an e-learning developer to kind of bring it all together. I guess the thing that might be missing is that practical element. So the theory we covered, but then the hands-on applying that. So the guidelines have the case studies and things, but maybe it could potentially shorten the workshop length if, you know, there was a prerequisite of doing the e-learning first. So yeah, great idea. Thanks for raising it. And it would be good to chat at some stage about your previous experiences as well.
Yes, we have it as a prerequisite for certain shorter courses.
Okay. That's, again, nice to hear the acknowledgement, and that sounds like a plenty of positive ways. Thank you. Conclude that item. So Mike, the agenda I'm staring at says it's time to talk about the utilisation of administrative databases and census programs.
Okay, thanks. You won't hear from me for too long. I'm just going to share my screen quickly, and I'll give a very brief introduction, and then I'll pass over to Gloria, who will take you through this. But this is really just for the purpose of information sharing for a project that we're setting up. It's in the very early stages, but we envision that at later stages of the project, the methods board will be engaged. So just this is all I would like to talk about just by way of background. So the context is of the project is within TIPS, where the strategy aims to ensure that PICs have the technical capacity and statistical capacity to manage and implement core statistical collections, but we're focusing on increasing greater utilisation and integration of administrative databases. It's also, you know, within kind of SDD's business plan and our ongoing support to our member countries, where we provide census and survey technical supports, but then also supporting administrative systems, so CRBS, and also in the establishment of trade and business registers. And then just finally, you'll recall at our last meeting of the Methods Board, we talked about the future of the census in the Pacific. We heard from experiences of Australia and New Zealand, where you provided your experiences in the implementation of a web-based census. And some of the things that sort of came out of those discussions were, you know, ideas around how do we manage risk in the conduct of census in the Pacific region. And I think that was in reference to the risk that was, you know, mitigated in the case of New Zealand by a strong administrative system that could, I guess, fill the gaps that occurred. So, you know, the context of what we're talking about today is in reference to managing risk in particular, and I guess to a certain extent in terms of the country's needs, or their ability and readiness to pursue new technology. So with that little bit of background, I'll hand over to Gloria, who'll take over.
Thanks, Mike.
It's through here, so they can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Like Mike introduced, the presentation is also about fitting into the global and regional statistical landscape, and we are all aware about the SDGs and the data demands they have put across to national statistics offices, as well as the COVID-19 situation, which also has its own set of demands. And looking into the future, we see the need for more regular data, high quality data, disaggregated data, and also need to focus into new areas of statistics. And so that means that NSOs will be required to be more overstretched as compared to what they are already. And the cost of statistical production are likely to increase significantly. And then there are also issues to do with high respondent burden and fatigue. So looking at admin data sources, we find that there would be a potential, there is potential for us to leverage on these sources to meet those growing demands, and also recognizing the advantages that they offer in terms of cost efficiency and non-response rates, frequency to have that data in a very timely way, and so on and so forth, but also recognizing that there are challenges around these data sources that we need to be aware of. So again, a bit of background that the UN Statistics Division did a survey on the 2020 World Programme of Censuses, and a part of the summary of the results show the major method of census being the traditional census method, but the increase in the number of countries that are using registers from the previous round. And of course, the key improvement they note is the use of technology and the use of administrative records to undertake censuses. So in terms of admin records, we have countries that are moving to fully register to the use of fully used registers, and others that have moved to combined methods. And when you combine both the 49 and the 29, then it does provide a significant change over time. So in the Pacific, what we imagine would be a key pro for utilization of registers is that there has been increased investments in development of administrative registers over the past decade. And that would potentially have led to improvements in the overall quality of their performance. And then another thing that we are seeing is an increase in the number of Pacific countries that are moving towards establishing national ID systems, which means that person records can, looking into the future, be assigned to an individual, to a unique identifier, and that creates a lot of advantages in terms of linking records, and also in possibly implementing population registers. So with this project, what we are aiming to do is to basically provide an opportunity for learning and to look at the knowledge that countries that have moved into these new approaches have generated, and basically providing it to countries to be able to understand the pros for the methods or the cons for the methods. So we have a two-phased project, and the first phase will be about basically knowledge and information sharing, and this we plan to do through a series of webinars and methodology papers which will be developed in alignment with the topics to be addressed by the webinars. So we also anticipate that once that first phase is completed, then if successful, there might be countries that are interested into actually moving into more in-depth work, for instance, taking a stock of the status of their registers and looking into the key action areas that will be proposed following the project and following learning from countries that have gone in this direction. So these are just a list of some of the presentations that we are hoping will be covered through that session. An overview of census methods and international guidance and innovations that have happened over time globally, and then we'll also have a summary of the key themes and lessons coming from adoption of registers in the application of censuses across the world. We'll look at the prerequisites for undertaking these kind of methods, the advantages and disadvantages, and then we'll also hope to have specific country examples that have either implemented fully registered methods or combined methods, countries that have population registers and those that don't, countries that have unique ID systems and those that don't. So what we plan to have here is a theoretical presentation, and at the same time pull onto countries that have actually done this in practice and bring them to be able to deliver presentations on some of their key lessons and approaches. So for this project, we did advertise on the SPC website, and we were able to contract Ian Cope to this project. And Ian is a senior executive of the UK office formerly. He worked on the census in the UK. Who was a director of our operations in the 2011 census, and we also understand that he was who was the international census expert in the New Zealand 2018 Census External Data Quality Assurance panel. So we have started working with him, and that is mainly virtually. So what we'd like to present to the board is to, first of all, request to present the project to the board for review and endorsement of the methodological papers. And then we also request for the board's advice on particular topics of interest that they would want addressed, and also on priority papers that they would like to see in their next session. So yeah, I think I just want to go back to the first point, is that we request the board to consider this project for endorsement, and the methodological papers that will be produced from this work to be subject of the agenda in the next meeting. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Gloria. So, members, any questions, comments on what you heard?
I might kick off. Look, there's no doubt in my mind anyway that this is the way of the future, and this is the direction we're heading. The question, I guess, is, although the destination is clear, how quickly do we move down that path, and in what aspects? Look, my suggestion is to focus initially on using administrative-based sources to measure change, to measure differences, which does come through a bit in the summary of the agenda. But using administrative sources to estimate the size of the population, I suspect it will take some time to get there. I'm not sure we should be talking about administrative-based censuses just yet. That's my view. There'll be other views, but for what it's worth, that's what I think.
Okay. Thank you for your view, Bruce. It's good to help it. Other views?
Hello, Vince. In our circumstances, because of the size of our population, I think I've always been advocating for a population register or similar, because also the size of our office, it takes a lot of resources for us to go out and collect the information in that sense, specifically for censuses. So we have to, most of the time we have to, yes, probably triple or quadruple the size of our office in the space of time that we needed to collect those. I've found that it is possibly more cheaper to do this census activity. We did have a population register, but that is, I guess that is up to government to decide whether that is the way to go or not. Anyway, that's just my view on administrative data collection. I think I would strongly advocate for us, being a small system, statistical system, that it could be possible for small statistical NSSs. That's my view.
No, thank you, Pierre. It's an interesting point. I do remember having at least one coffee cup discussion with Kristen about maybe when countries get below a certain size, then it makes a lot more sense to be able to make a register, you might call it, but it may be a spreadsheet of population. Other views, other comments on next steps and the ways ahead? Funnily enough, I discover as I sit here that Ian Cope is emailing me and trying to ring me at this very point, at this very moment. So this is so clearly your comment on your slide that is well known to me is very, very true. Clearly everybody's, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so Vince, if I may, I think, so the idea is originally around the initial phase being capacity building and kind of a scoping assessment. So I don't think we're going to jump in head first to say like we're establishing a population register. It's really just about like learning from other parts of the world who've had successes and failures, and then using those kind of webinars as an opportunity to scope out if there are people in addition to IPIA who are really interested to set these up. And most certainly, you know, I think if phase 2 happened where we do look at establishing something like a population register, we'd be looking at somewhere like Nauru or the Cook Islands or Niue where, you know, the ins and outs of the country are relatively simple. But definitely we take on board that feedback from you, Bruce. Thank you. The I guess objective of the presentation was for information sharing and to also just see if we can get this as an agenda item for the next meeting in August, where I think we will have some of the methodological papers prepared. So we'll be seeking review of the board of those papers. So that's really what we're trying to get out of this information sharing agenda item.
I don't think anybody's going to argue against you coming in August and showing us where you're up to. I'm resisting the temptation to start relating the experience of New Zealand in this regard. I mean, as you said, we made extensive use of the admin data in the last census, but that was off the back of something like a 7-year program that we had to be very careful what it was about. It was basically about trying to maximise our capacity to be able to use person level administrative data, and we were very careful about talking about what its role might be as we went on. So I think a lot of, you know, what do you have and what is it good for and what's its structural strengths and weaknesses work is a fantastic place to start.
Vince, can I just share that I think we're aware that at least 3 countries are working on having national IDs for their citizens. So,
okay.
There'll be a lot of information being collected in addition to all the registration information that's available. So in a lot of countries, people are used to being registered. So I think in a good time to start working on this population register.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. That'll certainly change the game, won't it? Okay, but thank you. So yes, we'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Now, I'm conscious that we now have an item with the exciting title of Administrative Matters, which is essentially follow-up from previous items, which sadly there's not so much to say about, given that, well, 2 things really. One is I would guess that our concerns about COVID have superseded some of the issues that we previously were interested in talking about. And secondly, my own inability to do a lot of following up and clarifying things with people prior to this meeting. But I thought you've been very clear throughout the meeting that you're, 1, keen to confirm that we do look to have a meeting in August. And clearly we've accumulated in the course of this meeting over the last 2 half days things we want to talk about there. Mike, is there something, I'm just sort of looking to you to guide us through what's the most useful thing to talk about right now?
Yeah, so I think Apelli's actually got some notes to talk about what's happened since the last. I hadn't even thought to Apelli, but the last meeting. So I might leave it to Apelli. I've got some ideas on agenda items for the next meeting, but I'll come back to that.
Thanks, some of the items that we've listed follow up the monetary poverty questions, the action taken, presentation was done by Kristen this morning in the discussions. And the chair, you had summed up the way forward. The other one was on multidimensional poverty. No recommendations were made. IDA project backstab. This is a standing agenda item at PSMB meetings. The other one is on statistics collection financing facility. Since the last PSMB, we were invited by Bruce Campbell, and from that meeting we had in Suba, there was a draft governance paper, paper on governance and financing structure, but since then nothing has progressed, and then Bruce has moved on, as well as Stanley, who are heavily involved in this work. The other action item was to pull all information on copy together, either in paper, some other instrument. We have been made aware that there is a publication by ADB, the copy effect, boosting survey data through mobile technology, and that will be useful enough for us all. On the future of census in the Pacific region, Gloria's presentation this morning talked a lot into that. And one of the important things is the support to countries. The need to support countries when they assess their readiness to pursue new technologies, as well as new forms of data collection. The new labor force module in PHEs to be tested in the context of Census Pacific. Michael Sharp's presentation this morning is the progress we can report on. On improving processes for representation of all PICT NSOs on the Pacific Standards Method Board, we're proposing that all NSOs are invited to join the next virtual PSM meeting. And that's all from us.
We will add those to the meeting minutes just to document actions taken since the last meeting. But I think the main thing that's outstanding since the last meeting is, in fact, the monetary poverty guidelines. And I had a chat with Billy Army about this, and he said that he is going to try and get something more formal with recommendations to us on, non-monetary approaches to poverty. And the other thing is this audit of software, which we haven't got to. We talked about doing an audit of the software packages that the NSOs are using for data capture and data processing. And we've made progress, but we don't have anything to present back, but it can be an agenda item in August. That's it.
I'm going to do something very unusual for me, which is to remember a matter of procedure, which I have. Do my memory play tricks on me, or do we only exist as the methods board under our mandate for 3 years first time up? By the time we're talking about meeting in November this year, that was the 3 years that we were supposed to exist for, and there was some question about it was going to be we were supposed to have a look at ourselves and decide whether we are, whether we're sufficiently useful to continue to exist, or maybe someone else is going to do that. And I was wondering, well, put it this way, I won't make that be a big thing, but that's my recollection, and maybe we could just go back through all our initiating documents and just see if after 3 years we're supposed to have done something to say whether we still exist or not, because this will be or is this 2 years we're having, or a third year? I'm trying to, I think next March would be
So you're right, Vince. It is coming up to 3 years. I think, if I recall correctly, the 3-year mark wasn't a point to determine the board's continuation. It was more a question as to the board's membership and the chair. of the board. But the HOPS outcome did state that if everyone agrees for the chair and the current board to continue its tenure beyond 3 years, I'm paraphrasing, and I think I'm correct in saying that that's acceptable. But I have a feeling that the HOPS meeting will ultimately decide on on whether you will remain chair and whether we will remain on the board.
Right. Okay. So, but clearly at some point we'll have to get ready with recommendations, or they'll have to initiate a process that decides what they think. Okay.
Yes, sorry, I'm just sharing my my screen, and maybe I'm paraphrasing from our board's TOR that says that 3 years is the review of the membership.
Oh, it might well be. Okay. Look, I didn't want to, it occurred to me that it's an issue not to lose sight of. Not so, conscious that having run over time yesterday, it'd be highly desirable not to run over time today. But I am taking it that we're thinking, given all the pressures on us and the amount of the work we've had to do, that a meeting in August is a good idea.
Yes.
And that in that meeting we can, and you'll work on the agenda for that meeting, the
yep.
SPC. And we.
Sorry, so at the moment, I'm proposing the agenda items to be a review of the IDA project's operations manual, to look at some of the methodological papers coming from the POP register project, perhaps a follow-up discussion on poverty, if we're at that point yet, and then we may be able to present back on this software stock take. But I think that, we should just really focus on the key issues, noting that there'll be another scheduled meeting in October.
What happened to we're doing anything about the rapid high frequency surveys? Is that on the?
Okay, I think we should update on that too.
Sorry, is somebody else wanting to make a suggestion? I can hear.
I think IPIA is.
Oh, we've got a message, is it? I'm sorry. I'm not a good chat reader.
Okay, so IPIA's written in the chat in relation to approaching USP to establish a statistical centre of excellence for a Pacific Statistics Institute in Nauru's USP campus. The aim is to heighten the profile of statistics and allow innovations and experimentations, and formalising training programs that are certified, that are touch upon in these discussions. Okay. Coordination and pooling experience around the region.
Okay. Do you want us to talk about as an agenda item next time IPIA, or what's your proposed way of dealing with this?
Well, my idea is just to get your thoughts on it, maybe through emails and stuff on how to set up such an institute and find a home for statistics and all these current developments that we're talking about. And probably I'll circulate a model of the idea I have in mind and then maybe the methods board can provide their feedback on what should be included in certain, say, the curriculum or whatever, that kind of establishment. But because this idea was floated around in the first phase of TIPS, where the region needs to establish a statistical institute, sort of like that in Japan. So, and nobody has put their hands up yet to find a home for statistics. Right now, it's just an orphan child within every program in the University of the South Pacific. So, if we're gonna raise the profile of statistics in our activities and also in terms of the experimentations that we anticipate, I think this is a good area. This also alleviates the PSMB in making decisions on what experiments are to be undertaken or approved and not. I think it takes the burden also away from SDD as well. So just my thoughts.
The way ahead, if you've got an idea.
Before we finish, I mean, that's just before we finish. I mean, I know it's getting close to it, so that's why I put it in the chat box.
Right.
This away from the agenda.
Thank you, Apir. It sounds like the sort of thing that if you could circulate something and people could give some consideration to it, we can certainly talk about it next time.
Yes, if that's possible, then I'd like to put that on the agenda in the next one.
Okay. Other suggestions, concerns? So Mike, we'll attempt to look at circulate minutes. I mean, obviously we've gone through a different process with this meeting. As soon as we can, and certainly, mind you, if we won't be so far away in August, will we?
We will try and get the minutes out in a more timely manner than we did in October. I think we finalised them in March. So we'll do a better job at that this time around. But yes, minutes from this meeting will be prepared and shared, and minutes from the August meeting. So I'm just wondering if we can land on a date for August. I propose late August. So
I think it's something.
I mean, we could potentially keep it to one day, but if we could possibly aim for the 27th and 28th and or 28th, but maybe we need to agree on this off the record, Vince. I'm reading your body language.
No, look, I'm just thinking. I tend to be, I sigh and have to think about. I'm going to dredge through my email and try and figure out what to do. So I'm going to find it, but certainly put suggested dates out pretty quickly. I don't know, and maybe at the same time people could comment. My own feeling that spending a lot of time on Zoom is a tough ask. And if we're going to have 6 hours, then it's probably better broken up over 2 days. Is my first intuitive feeling. I dread the thought of trying to spend 6 hours in a day on or something close to that in a Zoom
And
meeting.
with time zones, it would be challenging.
Yeah, we agree with you, Vince, on that.
I thought Kristen was asleep by now.
Yeah.
I turned off my camera because I've been drinking for the last hour. I'm fine.
We certainly can't have a beer together or anything like that.
That's gin.
Okay. Hey, look, I'm very conscious that there's one. It was a bit unfortunate the way things fell. That in some ways we had to have one of our toughest discussions when we were in this virtual environment, which clearly makes it a little harder to deal with each other in the way we like to. So that was tough. Anyway, look, thank you for hanging in there, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you. Well, I'll see you virtually next time, and hopefully the world will allow us to be physically present with each other before too long.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I conclude the meeting.